opportunity and a blueprint. Let's build a better America together. I yield back.
Thank the distinguished chair of the Congressional Black Caucus for her always thoughtful and eloquent remarks. And now I want to yield some time to the architect of the CBC budget, the distinguished gentleman from Virginia, Representative Bobby Scott.
Thank you, and I thank the gentleman from New York for yielding, and I join in your remarks for praising Congressman Major Owens, because he, as you pointed out, led the Congressional Black Caucus budget for many years. He showed how you can be fiscally responsible and still address the critical needs of our nation, with a particular emphasis on the least of these and the need to invest in education. So I appreciate your comments. Mr. Speaker, as the conferees begin to negotiate a budget agreement to fund the federal government for the remainder of fiscal year 2014, they should look at the Congressional Black Caucus budget. The CBC budget makes tough choices, but not at the expense of our most vulnerable communities. The CBC budget cancels the economically disastrous sequester. It protects and enhances Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, TANF, and other vital safety net programs that protect millions of families from poverty. It also reduces our nation's budget deficit by approximately $2.8 trillion over the next decade. Mr. Speaker, most of the ideas that have been presented over the past to either cancel the sequester or reduce the deficit almost always involve proposals to cut Social Security and Medicare. These ideas have included changing the way the Social Security benefits are calculated, the so-called chain CPI that cuts the cost of living increases, or raises the age of eligibility for Medicare from 65 to 67. These are cuts in those programs. The CBC budget shows how you can be fiscally responsible without attacking those critical programs that people have paid for during their working years. The CBC budget is able to pay for the cancellation of the sequester and reduce the budget deficit and without harmful cuts to Social Security and Medicare. It calls for revenue enhancements totaling $2.7 trillion over the next decade. Our budget outlines how the House Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee can reach this number by highlighting several options that total $4.2 trillion that could be used to reach the $2.7 trillion revenue target. Some of these options include $1.1 trillion by limiting the deductibility of corporate interest payments. Now, when corporations want to raise money, they can sell stock or they can sell bonds. If they sell stocks, they make a profit and pay dividends to their stockholders, but they pay tax on the income before they pay the dividends. With corporate debt financing with bonds, when you pay the interest on the bonds, that's tax deductible. Why should there be a tax preference for debt financing instead of equity financing? If it was the same and you denied the deductibility of corporate debt interest payments, you could raise $1.2 trillion over 10 years. You could close special tax breaks and corporate loopholes by limiting deductions for upper-income individuals or closing some of the corporate loopholes like the gas and oil advantages that they enjoy. You can raise almost $1 trillion, over $800 billion, by taxing capital gains and dividends as ordinary income. Traditionally, 30, 40, 50 years ago, they were taxed actually above ordinary income for dividends. If you tax them just the same, $880 billion could be achieved. Surcharge, 5.4% surcharge on income over $1 million gets you almost $500 billion. Trading speculation tax, especially you could also limit the Bush-era tax cuts to that portion of your income, cancel those tax cuts on that portion of your income over $250,000. Only a privileged few make more than $250,000, so that $200 billion could be achieved without being disadvantageous to very many individuals. Another $135 billion can be raised by returning the estate tax exemption to what it was in 2009. You can raise over $300 billion if you reduce it to what the rate was when President Clinton left office. These are just some of the ideas, and we've listed them specifically, showing over $4 trillion of possibilities for only $2.7 trillion to make our budget add up. Now, that's a lot of money. But it is in stark contrast to the budget that we actually passed in this House, because that budget calls for closing a gap of $4 trillion. Now, it's unspecified. I don't know how in the world they're going to close a $4 trillion deficit, because they would have to raise $4 trillion in taxes, or if they're not raising any taxes, spending cuts in the area, in discretionary spending in the area of 1/3 across the board. Now, we're having trouble dealing with the sequester of about a 10% cut across the board. You can imagine how unlikely it would be to achieve 1/3 across-the-board cuts. And so this budget is real. They're real numbers. The revenue enhancements provided in the CBC budget would allow Congress to totally cancel the sequester, actually pass a jobs bill totaling about $500 billion, which would end the recession by putting millions of Americans back to work, and provide billions more for long-term investments in our economy through education, job training, health care, and advanced science and research. And as I said earlier, these reforms contained in the CBC budget would reduce the deficit by about approximately $2.8 trillion over the next decade when compared to the CBO's baseline. This would put our nation on a strong and sustainable fiscal path, all without jeopardizing programs that support our seniors and programs that educate our next generation of leaders in business, science, and technology. The CBC budget would be a wise starting point for the House and Senate conferees, much better than the budget we passed, because there's that $4 trillion gap that's unexplained. These numbers add up. It's an imperative that Congress pass a budget that expands economic opportunity, invests in the American people, and reduces the deficit. The CBC budget presents a concrete plan in stark contrast to the budget that we passed in the House, because it is backed up by actual numbers and it adds up. And it shows how we can reduce the deficit while not being forced to make further cuts to vital programs that support our nation's safety net. And most importantly, the CBC budget presents a clear path both to economic and fiscal prosperity for our nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Thank the distinguished gentleman from Virginia for his very thoughtful and comprehensive remarks. It's now my privilege to yield the floor to a very distinguished member of the House Budget Committee, someone who has consistently been a voice for the voiceless and an advocate for the poor, for the disenfranchised, for all those aspiring to the American dream. Let me now yield to the distinguished gentlelady from California, Representative Barbara Lee.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me thank you, Congressman Jeffries, for your tremendous leadership, for your vigilance and your dedication. Every week you have brought forth these discussions to really inform and educate the public about the very important work of the Congressional Black Caucus, which of course is part of our work to strengthen our nation with policies and a budget that will reignite the American dream for all. So I just have to thank you for the time that you put into this, because this is so important, and your voice and leadership is tremendously needed at this moment in our history. Also, I just have to say and salute our phenomenal chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, the gentlelady from Ohio, Congresswoman Marcia Fudge, for her very bold and her very brilliant leadership, and by ensuring that the entire Congressional Black Caucus continues to be the conscience of the Congress. As a member of both the Appropriations Committee and the Budget Committee, I have seen firsthand the Tea Party Republican vision for our country's future. And believe you me, it is not a vision of shared prosperity or economic growth. This was reaffirmed earlier this month when the Tea Party Republicans held the government hostage in a failed attempt to take away health care from millions of Americans across the country. This week, as House and Senate conferees meet to develop a broader budget plan, I am pleased to join my CBC colleagues calling on Congress to adopt a fair and equitable budget, such as the budget the Congressional Black Caucus proposed earlier this year. And I, too, must thank Congressman Bobby Scott for his stellar and dedicated leadership in leading the Congressional Black Caucus's task force in the development of this, and it is a pro-growth, pro-people, and pro-American budget. Now, we've already seen through the Republican Ryan budget, which was released earlier this year, what the Tea Party priorities are. Their budget released earlier this year would shortchange 99% of the American people in order to give even more tax breaks to millionaires and to billionaires. It protects tax loopholes for special interests and big oil. And at a time when we need job creation the most, the Tea Party Republican budget will kill more than 2 million American jobs in 2014 alone. The Republican budget would take away food from hungry children and families, take thousands of children off of Head Start, and close the door to college for thousands of students next year. In fact, Mr. Speaker, 2/3 of all of the Tea Party Republican budget cuts target programs for people who are poor or low income. And communities of color, once again, would be hardest hit. Communities that already bear the brunt of the last economic recession. And all this is taking place as income inequality only continues to grow. The Tea Party's vision of America is very clear. Their budget would shred the safety net, shatter our economic recovery, and push millions of struggling families over the edge. Now, in stark contrast, the Congressional Black Caucus budget is a different way forward. This is a document that shows our nation's priorities and values. A budget is a moral document. How we spend our money reflects our values, and the CBC budget spends money where we value it the most. It protects and enhances Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and temporary assistance for needy families, better known as TANF, and all of our vital safety net programs that keep millions out of poverty. The CBC budget also protects all of our safety net programs, including SNAP. While protecting these and other important anti-poverty programs, the CBC budget also makes sound investments in critical areas like infrastructure, education, innovation, and poverty reduction in order to create ladders of opportunity for all. Finally, we must ensure that the Pentagon will not be exempt from any budget deals. The Pentagon should be audited and their bloated spending kept in check. Billions and billions are spent and wasted every year that the American people deserve to know where their taxpayer dollars are going. Not only will it bring accountability to the Defense Department, but those wasted funds could be used for programs like Head Start or Meals on Wheels. So in closing, Mr. Speaker, let me remind all of my colleagues that a budget, once again, as I said earlier, it is a moral document. How we spend our money reflects who we are as a nation. We must recognize that the choices we make impact real people, and especially the most vulnerable, people of color, women, and children. I hope that tonight, in honor and in memory of our beloved, the late Congressman Major Owens, who worked so hard, and I had the privilege and honor to work with him, with Congressman Scott, on our budget each and every year for a fair and balanced budget. I hope that we will remember his legacy by recommitting ourselves to his values and his ideals by putting people first in every budget that we put forward. Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time.
Thank the distinguished gentlelady from California for very eloquent and thoughtful, comprehensive remarks, as well as the remarks of Representative Bobby Scott as well, in noting, of course, the role that the late Congressman Major Owens played in the context of the CBC budget during the years that he served in this Congress with such distinction. I want to now yield the floor to the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, who I have the honor and the privilege of serving with on the House Judiciary Committee, and who represents her district in Houston so ably, but equally of significance, has stood on the floor of the House of Representatives and as a member of Congress, standing up for those who might not otherwise be able to stand up for themselves in the context of making sure they get a fair shake in their pursuit of the American dream. Let me now yield the floor to Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee.
Let me thank the gentleman from New York. It's a pleasure to be able to join you and my colleagues today, and I thank you for beginning your remarks today, continuing the tribute that we've given to Congressman Major Owens. He'd be proud that we were here tonight speaking for the voiceless, speaking for the poor, speaking for those who need educational dollars, speaking for those who, with a little investment, would again be able to reach for and grab the American dream. I want to thank the gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries, for again bringing us together. We all have different responsibilities, judiciary, homeland security. We're all concerned about comprehensive immigration reform, border security, and it's important, however, that we give a challenge and a charge to those individuals who will be gathering to reform the budget, and I cannot thank you enough for your timeliness and your leadership on these issues. So I rise today joining my colleagues and adding again my appreciation to the chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, Congresswoman Fudge, who in a day or two will be joining the Ag Conference and will be raising her voice for individuals who simply want a good and decent meal. I want to thank her for her leadership of the Congressional Black Caucus, and I will repeat the words of my colleagues, and that is, those words are that we remain, I believe, the heart and conscience for the American people whose voices, again, and whose issues may be lost in the conflicts of partisanship. The Congressional Black Caucus speaks clearly and loudly to the issue of pain suffered by so many that are poor in this country. So tonight I want to give a sense of urgency, and I want to raise the siren. I want to have a clanging bell, a loud noise, a banging of the drums, a call to the town by the town crier that we just can't live, we cannot suffer anymore in the budgetless, fundingless government that we're now in. The President of the United States has called on Congress to do its job. The President provided great wisdom and leadership in the first beginning stages of his administration in 2009 when he wisely, through great sacrifice and criticism, presented the stimulus package to the Congress and infused needed and important dollars to create growth and jobs, some 3 million plus jobs, closing the gap on some of the bleeding that was going on, having built on the restoration of the auto industry, President Obama having continued to build on the restoration of Wall Street, all of the prime industries that were crying out to this nation. Our President, along with the Democrats, sacrificed to do what is right for this nation. And of course, as many know, it was a sacrifice for the Congressional Black Caucus because at the same time, we knew that there were people who were suffering. But we looked to the greater good. And now we come to ask, is there anyone listening to the greater good? We don't have to go very far to look and see that the size of the middle class that my friends on the other side of the aisle, Republicans, keep talking that they're for the middle class. And all we need do is to look and to be able to see its decline, percent of households with annual income within 50% of the median. They don't need any more cuts. They need dollars into education. They need dollars into R&D, research and development. They need to be able to ensure that the transportation and infrastructure of America is funded. That creates jobs. They don't need any more sequester. And so the budget that we're about to engage in, the conference, should be a serious conference about ensuring that there is investment, because what we are suffering in the backdrop of mindless sequester that continues on, because we cannot get our friends to come to the table. The nation has been operating on a shrunken budget, slashed $80 billion in forced spending cuts since March 1st. And then in the course of that, and why the middle class is gone, 57,000 children have been taken off the rolls of Head Start, and the number is growing. Poor families and working families that fall into the middle class or trying to strive to the middle class. The cuts have also cut into public defenders and cut into the justice system. The cuts have caused layoffs of lawyers. It has caused, in essence, a overturning of liberty justice. And so in those ways, we can see pointedly the loss of the growth of the middle class. Sequester is across-the-board cut that does not allow the dream of Major Owens and the Congressional Black Caucus, infusion of dollars for higher education, Head Start, pre-K, primary and secondary, Title I funding. All of these fundings that are considered discretionary are slashed and burned. I want to see the growth of the American public. Training for nurses, more training for medical professionals. All of that gets slashed in the sequester. And so, Mr. Speaker, you would wonder, what has America become? And I want to thank Mr. Garamendi from California for sharing this poster. What has America become? Like the tale of two cities. They've not listened to the thoughtfulness of the Congressional Black Caucus budget that actually focuses on getting rid of the sequester so that we can not have a tale of two Americas. It hurts my heart to know that there are people in this country that are not benefiting from the greatness of the nation. Let me pause for a moment to make a simple statement. America is not broke. I am tired of people talking about how America is broke. A $4 trillion economy, a larger economy than the European Union that includes many countries. The ability to service our debt. Let me just say to you, I don't like debt. I don't like the deficit. But in actuality, in a capitalistic system, part of what churns the economy is the servicing of the debt. How do you have the money to service the debt? You infuse more capital, more dollars into the economy. You begin to sensibly talk about tax reform. You raise the revenue. You pay your bills. You build new roads. You help higher education. You pay for the military. You create opportunities for people to invent and build businesses. You create access to credit. You build more homes. That's how you churn the economy. And so tragically, from 2009 to 2012, the fraction of economic growth for the top 1%, not the 99ers, but the top 1%, according to this resource from the University of California, 95% went to the top 1%. They were growing beyond imagination. And let me defend the top 1% to say that there are people in the top 1% that want to give back to the nation. Warren Buffett wants to invest back into this country. But yet, the economic structure of 2009 and 2012, when my Republican friends were in charge, was 95% going to the top 1%. The preceding President Clinton had an economy that included a sacrificial budget, that actually had a budget, that did tax reform and revisions and had revenue. And thank goodness, it was at least fair, where the 1% were getting 45% and the bottom 99% were getting 55%. What is the configuration now? I might venture to say, Mr. Jeffries, that the 99% are getting 0, and the top 1% may be right now at 100%. And so I'm asking for the conference to go and work for America, not this configuration, but to grow the 99% investment in America, to be able to take the CBC budget and look at some of the tax reforms that could be utilized, to look at our job creation, which would include the maintenance and repair for public transit, highways, airports, ports, railroad, and bridges. The Houston Metro would appreciate having the opportunity to expand and create jobs, from those who would work on the rail lines, to those who would build the rail cars, to those who would run it, and the opportunity for people going to work to ride on it. Workforce development programs such as the Workforce Investment Act, programs that I've had in times, legislation that I introduced in times of high unemployment, to actually give those unemployed a stipend while they retrain and retrofit themselves into new jobs. Veterans programs which provide for investment in our veterans. One of the greatest gifts that we could have given to the second generation of veterans was the second GI Bill that Democrats passed for the returning Iraqi and Afghan veterans. They provided opportunity. And so I simply come today with a number that, as I close, that I wanted to leave. Maybe my friends in Texas will understand why this is so drastic. Because we're losing out of the gross domestic product in Texas some $15.2 billion. And we're losing 153,541 jobs in the state of Texas alone, some place where they're celebrating that they're creating jobs and their economy is growing, but the sequester is causing the loss of jobs across America. So tomorrow, we'll be standing against the SNAP cuts that will be coming on November 1st. Through Mr. Obama's and the Democratic Congress or caucus support, we passed stimulus that gave more food money to those who are in need. Why couldn't we keep that going? Simply to keep that going. But on November 1st, because we have not acted, this Congress will shut down the food for those who have gotten just a little bit to feed their family. So I am hoping that when they go to conference, what will be on their mind is they're pledging allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, not to the 1%, but the 99%, and that we will come back out of this economy and there will not be a tale of two Americas, but it will be one America where everyone has an opportunity, and that the motto of America, united, investment into more than just a few people, but to a lot of people, giving them the opportunity to build this economy. I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank my constituents in Houston for understanding and recognizing that we must work together to build a better Houston, a better Texas, and a better America. I yield back.
I thank the distinguished gentlelady from Texas for her very powerful, strong, thoughtful, and comprehensive remarks. And hopefully, as we move forward in this Congress with the conference committee that Representative Lee just discussed, they will take heed to her plea that you keep in mind those in America in the middle class and working families, those who aspire to be part of the middle class, and be compassionate as we move forward to address the issues that confront this nation. Now, earlier this month, as a result of the reckless behavior of some in this House of Representatives, we experienced 16 days of a government shutdown. It was a legislative joyride that was doomed to end in a crash and burn scenario, as it did. And unfortunately, as a result, the American people have been left with the damage of a $24 billion hit to the economy in terms of lost economic productivity. Thankfully, as a result of the agreement that reopened the government, both sides agreed to finally move forward with the appointment of negotiators to try and resolve differences in the House Republican budget and the Senate Democratic budget, and move forward with a plan for America that both re-energizes our economy and deals with the long-term deficit problems that we will have to confront. The CBC budget that has been discussed here on the floor of the House of Representatives, we believe, provides insight into the type of things that should be considered by the negotiators in the House and the Senate as they move forward. I would note parenthetically that though the conference committee is just at the early stages of beginning at this point in time, this process really should have occurred months and months ago. This House passed its budget in March. The Senate passed its budget shortly thereafter. And Democrats in the House and in the Senate have been calling for the appointment of conferees since the early spring. But for some reason, there was a refusal amongst our friends on the other side of the aisle to move forward. But we're thankful that at this point there's an agreement finally to sit down. The American people have demanded that we attempt to find common ground to resolve the issues of concern for this great nation. Now, there are two different approaches that have been put forth. Our approach is designed to deal with the deficit problems that we have in a balanced fashion. The other approach, I believe, is designed to balance the budget on the backs of the most vulnerable people in our society: children, working families, the poor, the disabled, middle-class folks, senior citizens. Now, some may say that's just hyperbole. Well, what does the budget on the other side of the aisle actually do? It cuts assistance pursuant to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, by $135 billion. That's not hyperbole. That's in the budget. In a country at this moment where 50 million people are hungry, 18 million of them children. The budget put forth by the other side of the aisle also cut spending on higher education by $168 billion. That's not hyperbole. That's in the budget, making it more difficult for young people in this great country to access the American dreams. Young people who are already in a debt crisis. Student loan debt in this country exceeds $1 trillion. We should be doing more to help people get a higher education, not less, in this country. The document that was presented by the other side that will be subject to negotiation at the conference committee also cuts assistance and spending on Medicaid by the amount of $810 billion. That's not hyperbole. That's in the House Republican budget, notwithstanding the fact that the majority of people who benefit from Medicaid assistance in this country are actually children and the disabled and senior citizens. And so we got very different priorities, blueprints, roadmaps, as it relates to dealing with the problems that we confront here in America. The balanced approach that we advocate for essentially has four different elements. First, we believe it's important to invest in the American economy. It's time to invest in America. Invest in job training and education, transportation and infrastructure, research and development, technology and innovation. Let's invest in America so we can create increased economic activity. We're in the midst of a very schizophrenic economic recovery. It's a recovery that has disproportionately benefited the wealthy in America. Let's just look at the facts that have been laid before us. We've got corporate profits that are way up, stock market way up, CEO compensation way up, productivity of the American worker way up, yet wages have remained stagnant and unemployment is still stubbornly high. Working families and middle-class folks have been left behind in the context of this recovery. That's why we believe the first element of any budget has to invest in America. Because if you invest in America, you increase economic activity. You increase economic activity, you raise consumer demand. You raise consumer demand, the economy grows. If the economy grows, by definition, the deficit will be reduced. And parenthetically, let me also note, despite all the rhetoric from some of my friends on the other side of the aisle, under this administration, Barack Obama, the deficit has actually been reduced by half during his 5 years in office. In fact, I think as a percentage of GDP, the deficit has been reduced to a degree that has not been seen since the drawdown in the aftermath of World War II. So we hear a lot about fiscal irresponsibility directed at the White House, notwithstanding the fact that this White House has presided over a near historic level of deficit reduction. Invest in the economy. Second thing that's important is that we should get rid of some wasteful corporate loopholes that have outlived their usefulness. If we just closed or changed or modified some of the benefits that oil and gas companies have received, they're making record profits. There's no reason for the loopholes and the benefits and the subsidies that exist right now. If we just were to address them, we could save the American people $25 billion over the next 10 years. If we were to change some of the loopholes that actually incentivize companies to move jobs overseas, we could save the American people $168 billion over the next 10 years. If there is such a moral imperative not to saddle our children with the debt burden that we have in America, if that's such a moral imperative, can't we not agree upon a single loophole that can be closed in the name of the children and the grandchildren of America? Not one? That's what we believe is the right thing to do here in the CBC. The third thing that I think is part of a balanced approach to dealing with the budget and a reduction in the deficit has to do with making some spending cuts where appropriate, but we've got to do it in a manner that's sensitive to the fragile nature of the economy. But I think all of us on this side of the aisle are willing to concede that there are probably some areas where efficiencies can be found in the name of fiscal responsibility for the American people. Spending reductions sensitive to the fragile nature of our recovery should be part of any balanced approach to dealing with the problems that we face in America. And lastly, we in the CBC certainly believe that any budget agreement has to stand up for important social safety net programs in America, like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, programs that have been phenomenally successful, particularly in reducing poverty amongst older Americans. And it's unfortunate because there are times when these programs, Social Security and Medicare, are unfairly demonized and made part of deficit reduction talks, even if the facts suggest they don't necessarily have a place in that regard. Social Security, for instance, remains a solvent program at this moment and into the foreseeable future. Social Security has nothing to do with the deficit. That, in fact, was a statement that Ronald Reagan made in 1984 in a debate with Walter Mondale. It was true then, it's true almost 30 years later. Now, when you think about the attack on our social safety net programs and the obsessive desire to change, decimate so-called entitlement programs, often this discussion is raised in the context of the enormous debt problem that we have in America, $16.7 trillion. Certainly it's a problem that we've got to confront in this country. But what also is often not clear is the fact that spending on so-called entitlement programs really do not account for the debt problem that we confront in America. And this is what this poster board and the chart so clearly illustrate. In fact, much of the debt that we currently confront in this America can be tied directly to policies emanating from the 8 years that George W. Bush was at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. More than half of our debt can be traced to the failed war in Iraq, totally unjustified, in search of weapons of mass destruction that still haven't been found and never will be found. The debt can be tied to the war in Afghanistan, the fact that it was misprosecuted as a result of being distracted by the joyride that took place in Iraq, costing lives and American treasure. The debt problem can be traced to the Bush tax cuts passed in this Congress in 2001 and 2003 without being paid for. And then, of course, the laissez-faire attitude toward Wall Street resulting in reckless behavior by some that collapsed the economy, robbed millions and millions of Americans of the little wealth that they had tied into home ownership, and the resulting bailout that took place and the need for an economic stimulus package through the Recovery Act. All of that accounts for a significant amount of the debt that we now confront. And so when both sides sit down at the negotiating table in the context of the Budget Committee, we should do so with facts objectively established, as opposed to putting a bullseye on the back of important social safety net programs like Social Security and Medicare just because some folks in this Capitol don't like those programs from their very inception. The last observation that I'll make is that the budget that has been set forth by the CBC and by Democrats in the House and the Senate, as compared to the budget that has been put forth by the House GOP, is very different in the context of how we review and evaluate tax fairness in America. I think some would be surprised to know that in the House GOP budget, it cuts taxes by lowering the top tax rate for high-income Americans from 39.6% to 25%. This is not the Reagan budget, supply-side economics. This is not George Herbert Walker Bush or George W. Bush in 2001 or 2003. This is the current budget that we're going to have to negotiate and find common ground, cuts the tax rate from 39.6 to 25% in order to slash all of the social safety net programs that we reviewed earlier. Why is that a wrong-headed policy? Well, as I close, and as this chart illustrates, when the top tax rate was at 39.6%, notwithstanding the fact that so many people on the other side of the aisle, in good faith, constantly say that type of tax rate is the type of rate that hurts the economy. But under the 8 years of the Clinton administration, 39.6% top tax rate, 20+ million jobs created. 8 years later, when the top tax rate was cut by this Congress from 39.6% to 35%, we lost 580,000 jobs. That's an apples-to-apples comparison that discredits the notion that lowering the tax rate somehow stimulates growth in the economy, when the 8 years of the Clinton administration as compared to the 8 years of the Bush administration clearly discredit that theory in the manner that a former president referred to as voodoo economics. And so I'm just hopeful that as we move forward with this conference committee, we've got big differences, but that we can sit down and endeavor to find common ground, do the business of the American people, keep government open, invest in our economy, protect our social safety net programs, and help create prosperity for the greatest number of Americans possible. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher, for 30 minutes.
Thank you very much. In the words of my former boss, President Reagan, well, here we go again. Well, over the last 25 years, I and a small band of who just refuse to go along and get along types here in Congress have engaged in a constant fight to maintain the intellectual property of American inventors. The intellectual property rights of our inventors is something that has been a great treasure to our country. Our founding fathers felt so strongly that with technology and freedom, and yes, with the profit motive, that was the formula that would uplift humankind, and they believed in it so much that they wrote that into our Constitution. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 of the Constitution. The Congress shall have power to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. Well, this provision in the Constitution, I might add, it's the only place in the Constitution, the body of the Constitution, where the word right is used. The Bill of Rights comes in during the amendment process of the Constitution, but our founding fathers thought so highly of technology and technology advancement, the right of inventors was included in the body of the Constitution. And this provision has served America well. It's led to general prosperity that we would not have had otherwise. It's led to national security, where we faced foes that outnumbered us so heavily, but we relied heavily relied upon were the technologies that were developed to help our armed forces defend themselves and thus defend the country. And of course, this has served us well because the technology and the freedom we have has created a society where ordinary people, decent people, can live very fruitful lives and can enjoy the fruits of their labor. Americans work hard, and this wasn't just created by hard work. That's the important thing to remember. Without hard-working Americans, it wouldn't have worked. But it was the technology that they used that made the difference. People work hard all over the world. They work long hours, and they live in poverty and deprivation. But we coupled the hard work of our people with technology, and thus what we've had is a success that has uplifted the common man and served as a light of hope for all of human beings, that we can produce the wealth needed for regular people to live decent lives. So that is the secret of America's success. Technology and freedom, and yes, perhaps we could include the right values. But it was our strong patent system and a respect for law that made the difference in that technology and freedom. Yet today, multinational corporations run by Americans want to diminish patent protection in the United States. We have had the strongest patent protection of any country of the world. Yet we have had, for these last 25 years, major efforts to diminish the patent protection that we have and to, harmonize it with the rest of the world. And it just happens that the European and Japanese patent systems are much weaker and offer less protection for the inventors. Well, over the years, we've had to fight back and turn back efforts to weaken the patent system a number of times. And I have been part of that effort and part of that struggle. I remember when they were demanding, for example, and they had a bill, it was so blatant, and we defeated it, called, they publish a patent, American Published Patent Act or something like that. And what it was saying was that before, it was the Patent Publication Act, that was it. And they said, after 18 months, if someone has filed for a patent, even if he wasn't going to get his patent, they were going to publish his patent application, meaning all the secrets should be out in the world. They tried to push that over on us. We just barely defeated that, but we defeated it with a bipartisan effort led by Marcy Kaptur and myself, Chris Cox, Tom Campbell, and others at that time. Then there was the effort, of course, to say that as soon as one files for a patent application, after 20 months, the ticking of the clock starts, and you could end up then with maybe 5 years of patent protection by the time it was issued. Here, we had always said 17 years after you are given the patent, you would then lose control, but you have 17 years where you own your patent. They tried to change that, could have changed it in a way that somebody, if it took the patent office 15 years or 10 years to develop a concept of a new idea and to figure out how to patent it, well, then that person would only have 2 years left. These were the ways that they were trying to destroy the patent rights that our people have enjoyed. And sometimes we turned those rights, efforts back. Other times we had to compromise. And other times, like last time around, we lost. For example, we changed the fundamental law over our objection. This body changed the fundamental principle that patents were to be given to the first to invent. If someone has invented it, they should be given the patent. That's been the fundamental guiding post ever since our country was founded. We changed that last year. We changed that to say not first to invent, but the first person who files for the patent. Of course, in an age when you have people who are able to sneak in on your computers, and there's hackers around, that could turn out to be a catastrophe. And already we can hear rumblings of that from China, where patents are being churned out and patent applications are being put in. And yes, if they can prove they were the first one, and even if they maybe found out about it some other way and can't explain it, no, they get the patent over the people who've done the work. Well, once again, I find myself fighting for the small inventors and struggling to defend the patent rights of these people to own and control their own invention. And what we've got now is a bill that has been introduced and that is just making its way. There will be a hearing on it tomorrow in the Judiciary Committee. Now, there's always been an excuse to change the fundamentals of the way our system works, because we've had the strongest patent system in the world, and they've always tried to find some excuse of changing it, and there's some sinister force at play that demands that we change the fundamentals of our patent system. Well, we've heard it before. For example, they claimed that it were submarine patents. That's a derogatory term. Oh, a submarine patent. That must be undercover or something suspicious about that. Well, they use that as an excuse to try to limit the time people owned their patent. They use that as an excuse to publish everybody's patent application even before it was issued. Well, this time the new word, the new buggy-boo that they're talking about is, and the scary word for the day is patent troll. Patent troll is being used as a word, and they probably hired a very sophisticated public relations company to come up with that patent troll term. They're being used to fundamentally change our patent system again in order to diminish and damage the rights of small inventors. Well, they can't say that's their purpose, so they have to come up with a scary word like patent troll. These so-called patent trolls are patent holders, or they are companies which represent patent holders, meaning people who own patents. They are engaged in defending the rights of those patents that they own. They either they purchase these patents, or their companies purchase these patents, basically from small inventors who didn't have the resources to defend and to enforce their own patent rights. These small inventors are now the partners of some of these companies or some of these individual investors. But it comes down to this. The inventor or the investor owns those patents. If you buy a piece of land or a patent from someone, you have that right. These patents that they own are just like any other patent granted by the Patent Office. But huge corporate infringers would have us believe that these patents are in some way unfair or evil. So what makes these patents different than the good patents that these very same corporations own? There are no differences. They are the same patents, the same kind of patents. Some of these multinational corporations have bought patents from small inventors. They own that, and they enforce them through type of legal action when they're infringed upon. The multinational corporations have coined the scare terms patent assertion entity, or PAE. They've coined non-practicing entity, NPE, and of course all of that means patent troll. The PR blitz, as I say, which was obviously created by a public relations company who made a lot of money coming up with that boogeyman, is used to change the basic legal protection of American inventors, and yes, change the legal protection of people who have bought the legal rights and own the intellectual property rights that they bought from the inventor. I suppose Halloween is the proper time to talk about scary trolls. How frightening. The so-called patent troll has been identified, this is how they identify him, as being out for profit from technology that he did not invent. My. Someone who's trying to receive a profit by making an investment into something that they didn't build themselves. Huh? Doesn't that describe banks and insurance companies and everybody else who put investments down and hope that they're going to have a return from those investments? but they themselves aren't making anything. They're using money and paper and contracts and helping people who need help. I have consulted with a number of outside individual inventors and groups, and they have reaffirmed that the legislation being proposed by the Judiciary Committee further disadvantages the little guy against the deep-pocketed multinational corporations. This is achieved in the guise of targeting the so-called patent trolls. Pay attention to the patent trolls, but don't pay attention how this weakens the small inventor. This means that persons or companies who have contracted with inventors who really need the help to see that his or her patent rights are respected are going to be undercut. How horrible it is of making business out of helping small inventors see to it that their patent rights are enforced. Proponents of this legislation are covering up the fact that they have stolen someone else's patent rights and now want to change the system so they can get away with it, so that someone whose patent rights they don't own, they have blatantly and just arrogantly grabbed and put into their own technology projects, that they don't have to pay for it. And when they're challenged in court, they complain, oh, this is a patent troll. No, what we have here is large companies who are willing to take from the little guy, which will in the end, yes, maybe be a short-term help to those companies, but it will undermine the progress of the United States of America, undermine our ability to create a wealth in our society that will make sure that our people can outcompete foreigners. Most of the corporations who are complaining about this are multinational corporations, run, of course, by Americans, sometimes not. Often the only way that a small business inventor can enforce his patent rights is by hiring a patent assertion entity as an advocate, meaning a patent troll. Sometimes the big guys want to simply steal the idea and say, sue me, because these little guys, these small inventors, which are the mainspring of so many ideas, they don't have the money to fight the big corporations. And now the big corporations want to make it impossible for them by changing the very law that protects them and protects their what they have created in their invention. One of the biggest alleged crimes of these non-practicing entities is that they don't actually make anything but just shift money around. Like I say, how horrible that is that some people make money in our society, although you can't really see what they actually make with their hands. Banks, lawyers, investment companies, insurance companies. Well, they make money, but they don't necessarily make things, but they are important to our economy. And even more important to our economy are those inventors. If we change the rules so that big companies can steal from them, those inventors will not be there in the next generation to come with the creations that uplift our people and defend our country and permit us to have security and prosperity. We're told that trolls are different. Well, let's put it this way. The trolls are different, and so they're trying to make money off something they didn't actually make themselves, but they aren't trying, as our multinational corporations are trying to do, to infringe on other people's property rights. Look who is pointing the fingers. The arrogance of these mega companies warning us against small investors having the help of some investor. This is nauseating. These attacks on the rights of patent holders are seen as valid and virtuous, but if they happened against any other rights, they would be identified as the problem they are. Remember the big groups that are angry because they used patented technology without paying the owners, justifying it on the idea of a lack of the owner's enforcement. So these companies say, well, the patent wasn't being enforced, so we could use it, and now they were really upset when someone wants to enforce that patent. Well, now the rights of the patents are being enforced by someone who paid the inventor to sell him that property right. A landowner who chooses not to develop a farm or land could be described as a non-practicing entity. Should we make it simpler and easier for others to take or steal the land because that owner isn't using it? Should we make it harder for him to continue to own his land simply because he doesn't use it or isn't using it like others would want him to? How about a music lover who purchases the rights to a song or an entire catalog of artists' songs? Should we make it hard for him to defend his ownership rights because he wasn't the musician? He didn't make the music himself? This campaign by multinational corporations and some of the world's richest men is an attack on the little guy's right to sell his intellectual property or to partner with someone else who can help him defend what is rightfully his. While I don't have time to go through all of the problems of this legislation point by point, I will refer to several problems brought up in this bill. The claim that this legislation is designed to go after patent trolls to make these patent trolls more accountable, that's what they claim. But how are they doing it? They're doing it by making it harder for every patent holder to defend his patent rights, every ordinary American. They claim they are making it easier and less costly to defend baseless claims of patent infringement. Well, they claim these are bad patents that should never have been issued. They claim many things. Section 3 of this bill, for example, makes it easier to defend against false charges of patent infringement. But it also adds significant new burdens onto a patent holder who rightfully seeks to defend his patent rights. In addition, this section increases the potential downside risk of suing to defend one's own patent rights. We should be doing everything we can to make the system quick, cheap, and simple to defend, both to defend patent rights and to defend against baseless charges of infringement. But this legislation is primarily geared toward making it harder, more costly, more time-intensive to file claims of infringement. That is exactly the wrong direction to take. The added pleading requirements will also require very thorough and expensive pre-filing discovery processes, again, discouraging underfunded patent holders from defending their patents. Well, there are limitations on a fishing trip type of discovery that may hold costs down and also protect patent holders from discovery IP. Those protections don't overcome the provisions which make it more difficult to defend perfectly respectable patents. In addition, by moving to what is essentially a loser-pay system, which is what this legislation is attempting, the little guy is once again put at great risk when suing a big corporation for infringement. So now the inventor, who is being victimized, may have to risk everything that he owns to pay the legal fees of his much better-financed corporate infringers. This concept of fee shifting is alien to this country's history, but very common in Europe, and it has been demonstrated to have a chilling effect on litigation at the expense of the rights of those who can't afford to sue because they can't afford to lose. The corporations, they can afford to lose. They're personally not coming out of having to pay anything. But the small inventor, he'll lose everything in his life if he loses. He will owe them that much money. And the big corporations, of course, are very capable of handling their own legal fees. Section 4 requires patent holders who believe they are being infringed upon to discuss all of his partners and assignees and other information to court and to the patent office as well, and to the accused infringers. Well, what we have then is if you sue somebody because they're infringing, they're stealing your intellectual property, you have to give up all of your rights, your privacy rights, and from that point on, you're an open book to anyone who's your competition, anyone who's your adversary, and, they'll probably as we see, as happens with these large corporations, you now are wide open to victimization by the corporates. Section 5 seems to repeal the current provision that guarantees a patent holder's right to sue a state, for example. If a state or the government infringes on your patent, there seems to be a provision in the bill that could say that you can't sue to get paid for what the government has stolen from you. That, of course, has to be has to be looked at and looked at by the court. Section 9 claims to make technical corrections of the bill, but they make sweeping wholesale changes to the way patent applicants and patent holders are allowed to preserve their patent rights. One of these so-called minor corrections entirely removes Section 145 from the law, which allows patent applicants to bring suit in civil court if they're not getting due consideration at the patent office. In other words, if the government employees at the patent office are blatantly not doing their job for some reason, whether it's corruption or incompetency, the patent applicant now, by this rule, by this bill, will not be able to seek justice in the court system. This is totally inconsistent with what our national tradition is all about. Removing Section 145 concentrates all decision power in the Patent Office, with the exception of one appeal to the circuit courts, which is required to give deference to the Patent Office through that process. This is exactly the opposite of what we want to do. We want to make sure that people have a legal right, if our government is off base, to appeal it to another branch of government. That's why we have the judicial and the legislative and the executive branches of government. Here again, part of the bill going in exactly the wrong direction. We review this legislation, and of course the title is Small Business and Startup Perspective on a Good Patent Bill. This is a analysis of the patent bill that we're talking about, and it quotes this source as, would gratuitously repeal 35 U.S.C. and 145, and that's the one I was just talking about, which has long protected patent applicants' fundamental nouveau judicial review patentable determinations by the Patent Office, meaning they note here that since 1836 anybody could repeal a decision within the Patent Office, but now they want to take that away, diminish the rights of our inventors, which will mean that we will not have the same type of innovation and creativity that we have enjoyed in this country. All this is being done on the notion that those evil trolls are dramatically driving up the number of patent litigations. An independent report from the World Intellectual Property Association, as well as a study from the U.S. General Accounting Office, says that is not true. So-called trolls may be backing up the little guys, but that is not a major cause of litigation. So we have the experts telling us that their excuse is wrong. And the GOP suggests that there are many things that we can do, but what is being suggested in this bill and others are suggesting is going exactly the wrong way. The bottom line is these provisions make it more difficult for the patent holder to defend his rights and raises the stakes so that the downside of pursuing an infringement in cases become more costly. We are hurting the little guy. We are making it difficult for the mainspring of human progress, the ideas, the creativity of our country and our countrymen can be brought to play to uplift the lives of our people, to create more energy, to create higher quality goods, to make sure that we can compete with the hordes of people in Africa and in China and in India. But instead, if we're going to do that, we have got to have the best technology, and we are taking our great national asset of a patent office that has helped our country over the years, has helped us keep our country safe by producing the best defense technology, to keep ourselves competitive so that our average Americans can outproduce their competitive counterparts overseas. We are now going to take what has given us that ability, which is the genius of our inventors, and we're going to do what? We're going to squash it by giving in to corporate interests of multinational corporations that are not owing their allegiance to us, but instead owe their allegiance to their company, which they see now as an international company, not even an American company. I would ask my colleagues to pay close attention to this legislation and to join me in rejecting this attempt to diminish the fundamental property rights, intellectual property rights of the American people in the name of some troll or some scary title that would get us away from the basic fundamentals of what's being proposed. I would ask my colleagues to join me in opposing this legislation.
Does the gentleman yield back?
I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.
Would you like a motion from the floor to adjourn?